The entire parking lot went silent the moment the CEO laughed at the rusty old truck. What no one knew was that some stories are buried beneath faded paint, dented steel, and 30 years of sacrifice. The glass tower of Hayes Technologies shimmered beneath the bright Texas morning sun, reflecting streaks of gold across rows of luxury vehicles parked outside the company's headquarters. Sleek black SUVs lined the executive entrance. New sports cars gleamed beneath the cloudless sky. Employees hurried through revolving doors carrying laptops, coffee cups, and the confidence that came from working at one of the fastest-growing engineering companies in America. Then there was the truck. A weathered 1993 Ford F-150 rolled slowly into the lot, its engine humming with the steady rhythm of age. The faded blue paint had surrendered long ago to years of sun and rain. Rust marked the wheel wells. The front bumper carried scratches that looked older than some of the employees entering the building. The truck didn't belong among the polished machines surrounding it. At least that's what everyone thought. Behind the wheel sat Ethan Brooks, 52 years old, broad-shouldered, calm-eyed, the kind of man who carried quietness the way others carried authority. He shut off the engine and sat for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The truck's interior smelled faintly of old leather and pine air freshener. A small photograph was tucked beside the dashboard. Ethan glanced at it and smiled softly. The smile carried warmth, but also memory, the kind that never completely leaves. Beside him sat his 11-year-old daughter, Lily. Her blonde hair was tied into a loose ponytail, and she stared up at the massive building through the passenger window. "Dad?" she whispered, her eyes widening. "This place is huge." Ethan chuckled quietly. "Yeah, bigger than I remember." Lily turned toward him. "You've really been here before?" "A long time ago." He didn't say anything more. He rarely did when it came to the past. Lily had learned that some questions settled better when left alone. Outside, employees glanced toward the old truck. Some looked curious. Others smiled politely. A few exchanged amused looks before continuing toward the entrance. The contrast was impossible to miss. A rusted pickup parked among vehicles worth more than most houses. Ethan stepped out first. The morning breeze tugged lightly at his worn denim jacket. He moved with the relaxed confidence of someone who no longer needed to impress anyone. Lily jumped down beside him and smoothed her dress. Together, they started toward the building. Above them, the company logo stretched across the glass facade in polished silver letters. Ethan's eyes lingered on it for a second longer than necessary. Something flickered across his face. Not pride, not regret. Something deeper. Something impossible to explain. At that exact moment, a black Bentley pulled smoothly into the executive lane. Conversations shifted immediately. Employees straightened. Security guards became alert. The driver's door opened. Victoria Hayes stepped out wearing a tailored cream-colored suit and the unmistakable confidence of a woman who commanded billion-dollar decisions before breakfast. At 34, she had become the face of the company. Sharp, brilliant, respected, feared. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she moved toward the entrance. Then she stopped. Her eyes landed on Ethan's truck. The old Ford sat quietly beneath the shining tower, looking completely out of place. Victoria frowned. Several employees noticed her expression and turned to follow her gaze. A few chuckles emerged. Someone muttered something under their breath. Another employee smirked. The atmosphere shifted almost imperceptibly. Ethan didn't notice. Or perhaps he did, and simply chose silence. He rested one hand gently on Lily's shoulder as they approached the front steps. The glass doors reflected the morning sunlight. Above them, the company logo gleamed brighter than ever. And somewhere beneath that polished symbol of success, hidden beneath decades of forgotten history, a story was waiting to be uncovered. Victoria stood motionless for another second, her gaze fixed on the aging truck as if it were a stain on an otherwise perfect picture. Then she shook her head slightly and continued toward the entrance. The crowd followed. Conversations resumed. Laughter faded into whispers. Yet something about the moment lingered in the air like the final note of a song that refused to disappear. Ethan and Lily climbed the wide stone steps leading to the main lobby. Inside, sunlight poured through 40-foot glass walls, illuminating polished marble floors and towering displays that celebrated the company's success. Photographs of groundbreaking products lined the walls. Awards gleamed beneath carefully positioned lights. Screens played promotional videos showing innovation, growth, and vision. Lily turned slowly in a circle. Her eyes widened with every step. Dad, this place looks like a museum. Ethan smiled. Maybe every company tells its own story eventually. Did you ever work here? She asked. Ethan hesitated. A very long time ago. The answer sounded simple enough, but something in his voice carried weight. Before Lily could ask more, a young receptionist approached them. She offered a professional smile, though her eyes briefly flickered toward Ethan's worn jacket and weathered boots. Good morning. Are you here for the anniversary celebration? Ethan nodded and handed her an invitation. The receptionist glanced down at the card. Her expression changed almost immediately. Confusion, then surprise, then uncertainty. She looked back at Ethan, then at the invitation again. One moment, sir. She disappeared behind the desk. Lily noticed. Why did she look at you like that? Ethan chuckled softly. People get curious sometimes. Across the lobby, executives and department leaders mingled beneath enormous banners celebrating 30 years of achievement. The room buzzed with confidence. Investors laughed beside senior managers. Reporters prepared cameras near the stage. Everywhere Ethan looked, he saw faces too young to remember the beginning. Faces that knew the success but not the struggle. He felt no bitterness, only distance, like someone revisiting a hometown that no longer belonged to him. Near the far wall stood a display case filled with company memorabilia, old sketches, product prototypes, framed photographs from decades earlier. Lily wandered toward it. Ethan followed at a slower pace. Suddenly she stopped. Dad, her voice carried curiosity. Look at this. Ethan stepped beside her. Inside the case rested a worn leather notebook. Time had darkened its edges. A small plaque beneath it described it as one of the earliest engineering journals connected to the company's founding years. Lily leaned closer to the glass. That handwriting looks familiar. Ethan's expression remained calm. Too calm. Lots of people write like that. No. She looked at him carefully. It looks like yours. For a brief moment, silence settled between them. Around them, conversations continued. Glasses clinked. Laughter echoed. Somewhere a photographer called out instructions. Yet Ethan's eyes remained fixed on the notebook. Something deep and private moved behind them. Then he simply smiled and guided Lily onward. Across the lobby, Victoria entered with several board members at her side. She greeted investors, shook hands, accepted congratulations. Everything appeared effortless. Then her eyes drifted across the room. They landed on Ethan again. This time he was standing near the founding display, studying it quietly. Victoria frowned. There was something strange about the way he looked at those artifacts. Not like a visitor, not even like a former employee, more like someone remembering pieces of himself. The feeling irritated her for reasons she could not explain. She turned to one of the senior board members beside her, an older man named Harold Whitaker, 70 years old, one of the few remaining executives who had been there near the beginning. Victoria nodded subtly toward Ethan. Do you know that man? Harold followed her gaze. The moment he saw Ethan, the color drained from his face. His hand tightened around his glass. For several seconds he said nothing at all, and for the first time that morning, someone in the room looked at Ethan Brooks not with amusement, curiosity, or judgment, but with something far closer to astonishment. Harold Whitaker did not answer immediately. The noise of the lobby seemed to fade around him as he continued staring across the room. Victoria noticed the reaction at once. Harold was not a man easily surprised. During 40 years in business, he had negotiated mergers, survived recessions, and stood beside some of the most powerful executives in the country. Yet now he looked as though he had seen a ghost. Harold, Victoria asked again, do you know him? The older man blinked and quickly regained his composure. He cleared his throat and adjusted his tie. I may have seen him before, he said carefully. A long time ago. Victoria narrowed her eyes. The answer felt incomplete. Before she could press further, Harold excused himself and walked away toward another group of executives. His pace was calm, but something about it felt deliberate, almost like retreat. Across the lobby, Ethan remained unaware of the conversation. Or perhaps he noticed more than anyone realized. He stood quietly beside Lily as they moved from display to display. Every few feet, she stopped to read another plaque or examine another photograph. Dad, look at this one. She pointed toward a framed image hanging near the center of the exhibit. The photograph showed a group of engineers gathered around a workbench decades earlier. Their faces were younger, their smiles genuine. The room behind them looked nothing like the modern headquarters surrounding them now. It looked small, humble, determined. Lily tilted her head. Funny, some of these guys kind of look like the people walking around here today. Ethan smiled softly. People change. Time has a way of doing that. Do you miss being younger? She asked. Ethan studied the photograph for a moment. Sometimes, but not for the reasons most people think. Before Lily could ask another question, an announcement echoed through the lobby speakers. Guests were invited into the grand ballroom for the official anniversary presentation. Employees began moving toward a set of enormous double doors at the far end of the building. The crowd flowed like a river of dark suits and polished shoes. Ethan placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder and followed. The ballroom was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Round tables stretched across the room beneath soft golden lighting. At the front stood a massive stage framed by two giant screens displaying the company logo. Waiters moved between guests carrying trays of sparkling water and appetizers. Investors occupied the front rows. Executives sat near the stage. Employees filled the remaining seats. Ethan and Lily quietly found seats near the back. They seemed perfectly comfortable there. Invisible. Unnoticed. At least for now. Victoria took the stage moments later. The room immediately quieted. Confidence radiated from her as she stepped behind the podium. Welcome, she began, her voice clear and practiced. Today we celebrate 30 years of innovation, leadership, and excellence. Applause filled the room. Victoria smiled. She spoke about growth, vision, and the future. The audience listened attentively. Yet while everyone focused on the stage, she occasionally found herself glancing toward the back of the room. Toward Ethan. Something about him continued to bother her. Not because he appeared important. Quite the opposite. It was because he seemed completely unaffected by the atmosphere around him. Investors impressed other investors. Executives impressed employees. Everyone seemed eager to belong to the company's success. Everyone except Ethan Brooks. He simply sat beside his daughter, listening quietly, as though he had heard every speech before, as though he already knew how the story would unfold. Then came an unexpected moment. Victoria announced a short historical presentation prepared from the company's earliest archives. The ballroom lights dimmed. The giant screens flickered to life. Black and white photographs appeared. Images of workshops, sketches, blueprints, early prototypes. The audience watched politely. Then somewhere near the middle of the presentation, a photograph flashed across the screen for only a few seconds. Most people barely noticed it. But Lily did. Her eyes widened instantly. She leaned toward her father. Dad, she whispered. I have seen that face before. Ethan's expression remained calm. Too calm. Yet for the first time all day, his fingers tightened slightly around the armrest of his chair. And several rows ahead, Harold Whitaker slowly lowered his head into his hands. The image vanished from the screen almost as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by another photograph from the company's early years. Most of the audience never gave it a second thought. They continued watching the presentation, applauding at the appropriate moments, and smiling at the carefully edited history unfolding before them. But Lily could not let it go. She leaned closer to her father, her voice barely above a whisper. Dad, that was you. Ethan kept his eyes on the stage. The soft glow from the giant screens reflected across his face. A lot of people looked different 30 years ago. No, Lily insisted gently. That was you. For a moment, neither spoke. Around them, the ballroom remained filled with the quiet sounds of success. Silverware clinked against plates. Waiters moved silently between tables. The company logo rotated slowly across the screens. Yet beneath the polished surface, something had begun to shift. Several rows ahead, Harold Whitaker continued staring at the floor. Memories long buried had returned without warning. He remembered cramped workshops, endless nights, coffee-stained blueprints, conversations about impossible dreams. He remembered faces that had helped build the foundation beneath everything surrounding them now. And one face stood out more clearly than the rest. Across the room, Victoria noticed Harold's unusual behavior. She had worked beside him for years. He was disciplined, composed, and rarely emotional. Seeing him unsettled planted a seed of discomfort she could not ignore. As the presentation ended, the audience erupted into applause. Victoria stepped back onto the stage and thanked everyone for attending. Her smile remained flawless. Her voice remained confident. Yet her attention kept drifting toward the quiet man seated near the back. Something about Ethan Brooks felt increasingly out of place. Not because he appeared insignificant, because too many people seemed to react strangely whenever he appeared. When the presentation concluded, guests were invited into an adjoining reception hall. Music drifted softly from hidden speakers. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath golden chandeliers. Employees mingled with executives while investors exchanged business cards. Ethan and Lily moved slowly through the crowd. Lily remained thoughtful. "Dad, why did that picture bother everyone?" Ethan glanced down at her. Maybe it reminded them how much time has passed. "Did it remind you?" she asked. A small smile touched his face. "Maybe." Before she could ask more, a young executive accidentally bumped into Ethan while carrying a drink. "Sorry," the man said quickly. Then he paused. His eyes landed on Ethan's visitor badge. He frowned slightly before walking away. A minute later, another executive noticed him. Then another. Quiet glances began spreading through the room. No one approached directly, but curiosity was growing. Meanwhile, Victoria found herself standing with several senior board members near the center of the hall. She attempted to focus on business conversations, but fragments of earlier reactions kept replaying in her mind. Finally, she turned toward Harold. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Who was that man?" Harold looked across the room. Ethan was helping Lily choose a dessert from a serving table. The scene appeared completely ordinary. A father and daughter sharing a quiet moment. Yet Harold's expression softened with something that resembled respect. "Some people," he said carefully, "are much bigger than the stories people tell about them." Victoria frowned. "That is not an answer." Harold nodded slowly. "No, it is not." Then he walked away before she could stop him. Victoria remained standing alone, watching Ethan from across the room. For the first time all day, she felt something unfamiliar. Not confidence, not certainty, something closer to doubt. And far above them, hidden inside the company archives, another piece of forgotten history was already waiting to be revealed. The reception hall seemed warmer now, though nothing about the temperature had changed. It was the atmosphere. Conversations no longer flowed quite as easily. Glances lingered a little longer. Questions hung silently behind polite smiles. Ethan Brooks could feel it, even if he pretended not to. Years had taught him how to recognize when curiosity entered a room. The difference was that most people became uncomfortable under attention. Ethan simply carried on. Lily stood beside him near a display table covered with historical artifacts from the company's earliest years. There were faded photographs, engineering sketches, and yellowed documents preserved beneath glass. She studied each item carefully. "Dad, did people really draw everything by hand back then?" Ethan smiled. "Most of it. Computers were not always there to help. That must have taken forever. The best things usually do." Lily nodded thoughtfully. She had inherited her father's habit of listening carefully before speaking. It was one of the reasons Ethan cherished these quiet moments. Across the room, Victoria watched from a distance. She had spent the last 20 minutes attempting to focus on investors and board members, but her attention kept drifting back toward Ethan. Every strange reaction seemed to point in the same direction. Harold's silence. The receptionist's confusion. The executives whispering after noticing his name badge. None of it made sense. Finally, she made a decision. She crossed the room. Her heels clicked sharply against the polished floor. Several conversations slowed as people noticed where she was heading. Ethan looked up as she approached. Lily offered a polite smile. Victoria returned it automatically before turning her attention toward Ethan. "Mr. Brooks." Her voice remained professional. "I hope you are enjoying the event." "It has been interesting," Ethan replied. "Interesting?" Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Most people call it impressive." Ethan glanced around the grand reception hall. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. Investors discussed deals worth millions. Company banners stretched from floor to ceiling. "Impressive too," he said gently. "But interesting feels more accurate." Victoria did not know why the answer bothered her. Perhaps it was because he sounded completely sincere. Perhaps it was because he seemed unimpressed by everything surrounding him. "I understand you received a special invitation," she said. "How exactly are you connected to the company?" The question sounded casual. It was not. Ethan met her gaze calmly. "Like many people here, I knew some good people a long time ago. Victoria waited for more. None came. The silence stretched. Nearby executives pretended not to listen while listening very carefully. That sounds vague, Victoria finally said. Maybe some stories are difficult to summarize. Again, the answer felt incomplete. Frustratingly incomplete. Before Victoria could continue, a young event coordinator hurried toward them carrying a tablet. He looked nervous. "Ms. Hayes, we have a small problem." Victoria turned. "What is it?" "The archival presentation for tonight's final ceremony. Someone found additional material in storage that was never digitized." Victoria sighed. "Then leave it out." The coordinator hesitated. "Normally we would. But several of the founding board members specifically requested that it be reviewed first." At those words, Ethan's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not fear. Not concern. Something quieter. Like a memory knocking gently on a closed door. Victoria noticed. So did Harold Whitaker from across the room. The old executive's face tightened. He immediately started walking toward them. For the first time all evening, urgency appeared in his step. Yet before he could reach the group, the coordinator accidentally turned the tablet screen outward. A single scanned photograph flashed briefly across the display. Most people would have missed it. Ethan did not. Neither did Harold. And judging by the sudden look in Harold's eyes, whatever had just resurfaced from those forgotten archives was far more important than anyone in the room was prepared to admit. Harold reached the group just as the event coordinator lowered the tablet. His voice remained calm, but there was an urgency beneath it that only a few people noticed. "Let me see that." The coordinator handed over the device without hesitation. Harold studied the image for several seconds. The color drained slightly from his face again. Victoria watched every movement. "What is it?" she asked. Harold did not answer immediately. Instead, he locked the screen and handed the tablet back. "Just an old archive photo. You do not look like someone staring at an ordinary photograph." Harold offered a thin smile. History has a way of surprising people. Victoria was growing tired of vague answers. All evening she had felt as though everyone knew something she did not. She glanced toward Ethan. Once again, he appeared perfectly composed. His attention had returned to Lily, who was examining another display near the wall. The contrast irritated her. Everyone else seemed unsettled. Ethan seemed peaceful, as though whatever secrets hid inside those archives belonged to another lifetime. A few minutes later, guests were invited back into the ballroom for the final portion of the celebration. The evening sky had darkened beyond the towering glass windows. City lights now sparkled across the skyline outside. Inside, chandeliers cast warm pools of gold across white tablecloths and polished silverware. The atmosphere felt different now, less celebratory, more expectant. Rumors moved quietly from table to table. Executives whispered. Board members exchanged curious glances. The mysterious guest with the rusty truck had become the subject of more conversations than the event itself. Ethan and Lily returned to their seats near the back. "Dad," Lily said softly, "does everyone know you here?" Ethan smiled. "Not everyone. Some of them seem like they do." Ethan looked toward the stage. People remember different things. Lily studied him carefully. She had inherited her mother's ability to notice what others missed. "You are not telling me everything." Ethan laughed quietly. "That is probably true." On stage, Victoria stepped behind the podium again. She thanked the guests and prepared to introduce the final historical segment. Behind her, technicians adjusted the massive screens. Then an assistant hurried onto the stage and whispered something into her ear. Victoria frowned. "What do you mean there is additional footage?" The assistant spoke quietly. Victoria's expression shifted from annoyance to surprise. Several people nearby noticed. She glanced toward Harold. Harold immediately looked away. That alone told her more than words ever could. The assistant departed. Victoria turned back toward the audience. "Apparently," she said with a polite smile, "our archives department discovered several unreleased recordings and materials earlier today. We have not reviewed all of them, but since this is a celebration of our history, we will share a few highlights." Light applause followed. The ballroom darkened. The giant screens came alive once more. Old footage appeared. Grainy images of workshops. Engineers standing beside equipment. Early product demonstrations. Employees watched politely. Then came interviews. Founders speaking about sacrifice. Long nights. Impossible odds. The audience leaned forward. These were voices few had heard before. Even Victoria watched with growing interest. Then one recording appeared unexpectedly. The image quality was poor. The sound crackled softly through the speakers. A much younger version of her father stood inside a workshop, smiling beside several colleagues. The room grew quieter immediately. Many guests had never seen footage of him from those years. Victoria's eyes softened. Her father began speaking about friendship, trust, and building something that would outlast all of them. Then, suddenly, the recording froze. The screen flickered. Technicians scrambled behind the scenes. A still frame remained visible on the giant display. The audience stared. Victoria stared. Harold closed his eyes. And near the back of the room, Lily slowly turned toward her father because standing only a few feet behind her grandfather in that frozen image was a familiar face she had now seen twice that evening. The frozen frame remained on the screen for only a few seconds, yet it felt much longer. In the silence, hundreds of eyes studied the image. Most focused on Victoria's father. A few noticed the workshop behind him, but others saw something else entirely. They saw the man standing several feet away from him. Younger, leaner, wearing a work shirt with rolled sleeves and a determined expression. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. Lily stared at the screen, then at her father, then back again. "Dad," she whispered. "That is definitely you." Ethan said nothing. The ballroom lights remained dim as technicians worked to restore the presentation. Soft murmurs spread across the room like ripples across still water. Executives leaned toward one another. Board members exchanged uncertain looks. A few older employees squinted at the image as if trying to unlock memories hidden somewhere deep inside their minds. Victoria remained standing near the stage. Her heartbeat had quickened, though she could not explain why. She looked at the frozen image. Then she looked toward the back of the room, where Ethan sat quietly beside his daughter. For the first time all evening, she noticed that several of the oldest board members were not watching the screen. They were watching him. The realization unsettled her. The technicians finally restored the system. The image disappeared, replaced by the company logo. Polite applause followed as the audience attempted to move on. Yet the atmosphere had changed completely. Curiosity had become tension. Questions had become pressure. After the presentation ended, guests began standing and mingling once more. Conversations no longer centered on profits, partnerships, or future growth. They centered on the mysterious man at the back of the room. Ethan noticed the glances. He noticed the whispers. He noticed the way people looked at him, then quickly looked away. Still, he remained calm. "You okay, Dad?" Lily asked. Ethan smiled. "I am fine. Everyone keeps staring at you. Sometimes people get caught up in old photographs." Lily tilted her head. "I think it is more than that." Ethan's smile softened. "Maybe." Across the ballroom, Harold Whitaker finally made a decision. He walked directly toward Ethan. Several executives watched with open curiosity. Victoria noticed immediately and followed at a distance. Harold stopped beside Ethan's table. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Harold extended his hand. Ethan stood and accepted it. The handshake was firm, familiar, respectful. "It has been a long time," Harold said quietly. Ethan nodded. "Longer than either of us expected." Harold laughed softly, though emotion lingered behind it. "Some of us hoped you might come back one day." Ethan glanced around the ballroom. "Looks like the company did just fine without me." Harold's eyes lowered briefly. "That depends on how you define fine." The answer hung in the air. Victoria heard every word. So did several nearby executives. None of them understood the meaning, but all of them sensed the weight behind it. Before anyone could ask questions, an event assistant hurried toward Harold carrying a sealed envelope. "Sir," she said nervously, "we found this in the archive room." It was inside one of the founder boxes. Harold accepted the envelope. His expression immediately changed. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. He recognized it at once. So did Ethan. Neither man spoke. Neither man needed to. Because whatever rested inside that envelope had clearly been waiting for decades to be opened. The envelope seemed heavier than paper should have been. Harold Whitaker held it carefully, almost reverently, while the noise of the ballroom gradually faded around him. People continued talking. Glasses continued clinking. Music continued playing softly in the background, yet a strange stillness had settled over the small circle surrounding Ethan Brooks. Victoria noticed it immediately. So did everyone nearby. The handwriting across the front of the envelope was old but unmistakably deliberate. Harold stared at it for several long seconds. Ethan remained silent. Lily looked back and forth between the two men, sensing the importance of a moment she could not yet understand. "What is it?" Victoria finally asked. Harold looked up slowly. His expression carried something she had rarely seen from him. Not uncertainty, not confusion. Respect. Deep respect. "This was written by your father," he said quietly. Victoria froze. The words landed with surprising force. Her father had been gone for years, yet his presence still lingered throughout the company. His photographs hung on walls. His quotes appeared in annual reports. His vision was discussed in board meetings. But this felt different. This felt personal. Harold carefully turned the envelope over. The seal had never been broken. Why was it hidden in storage? Victoria asked. "Because some things were never meant for public display," Harold replied. Before anyone could say more, several senior board members approached. They had noticed the envelope as well. One of them, an elderly former executive named Charles Mercer, stopped abruptly when he saw the handwriting. His face immediately softened. "Good Lord," he whispered. "I have not seen that writing in 30 years." Victoria looked from face to face. Every reaction seemed to confirm the same unsettling truth. Somehow, everyone else knew more than she did. The realization stung. She was the chief executive officer. She had dedicated her life to protecting and growing the company her father built. Yet tonight, she felt like an outsider standing in her own history. Across the room, guests had begun noticing the gathering. Conversation slowed. Curious eyes turned toward the group. Rumors spread faster than facts. Ethan sensed the attention immediately. He disliked being the center of any room. He always had. Quiet dignity had served him better than recognition ever could. "Maybe this should wait," Ethan said gently. Harold looked at him. "Are you sure?" Ethan glanced toward Lily, then toward Victoria, then toward the enormous company logo hanging above the ballroom stage. "Some things happen when they are supposed to happen." Harold nodded slowly. The answer seemed to carry meaning only he understood. Victoria folded her arms. Her patience was wearing thin. "Someone needs to tell me what is going on." No one answered. The silence that followed felt louder than any speech. Finally, Charles Mercer stepped forward. His voice was calm but emotional. "Victoria, there are chapters of this company's history that were never included in presentations." She stared at him. "Why not?" Charles looked toward Ethan before answering. "Because some people never wanted credit." Victoria followed his gaze. For the first time all evening, she truly studied Ethan Brooks. Not his worn jacket, not his old truck, not the quiet way he carried himself. She studied the expressions of everyone around him. The respect, the gratitude, the affection, feelings that could not be manufactured, feelings that had been earned. A strange discomfort settled in her chest. Memories surfaced. Her father had often spoken about character, about loyalty, about debts that could never be repaid. As a child, she had never understood what he meant. Now she wondered if those lessons had been connected to someone standing right in front of her. Harold lowered his eyes to the unopened envelope. The ballroom seemed to hold its breath. Whatever waited inside had survived decades untouched. Whatever words her father had written were about to change the direction of the entire evening. And judging by the look in Harold Whitaker's eyes, perhaps much more than that. For a long moment, nobody moved. The unopened envelope rested in Harold Whitaker's hands while hundreds of people watched in silence. Then, slowly, Harold broke the seal. The sound was small, almost insignificant, yet it seemed to echo through the ballroom. He unfolded the letter carefully. The paper had yellowed with age, but the handwriting remained strong and clear. Harold looked down at the first line and immediately had to steady himself. Victoria saw the emotion in his face. "Please," she said softly. "Read it." Harold nodded. His voice trembled slightly as he began. "If you are reading this, then enough time has passed for people to forget how this company truly began." The room grew still. "Many people will remember my name. They will remember the products, the growth, and the success. But I hope they never forget the man who stood beside me when none of this existed except as a dream sketched on scraps of paper." Harold paused. His eyes lifted toward Ethan. Several people followed his gaze. Ethan lowered his head slightly. "The truth is simple," Harold continued. "There would be no company without Ethan Brooks." A collective breath swept through the ballroom. Victoria froze. The words struck her harder than she expected. Harold continued reading. "When we were young, Ethan worked beside me through every setback. When investors walked away, he stayed. When we could not pay bills, he stayed. When I wanted to quit, he refused to let me. The first products, the early designs, the foundation of everything we built carries his fingerprints. Silence. Pure silence. Victoria felt her chest tighten. She looked at Ethan, really looked at him, for perhaps the first time all evening. Harold's voice softened. Years later, when my family faced a crisis that threatened everything, Ethan made a sacrifice I never fully repaid. He asked for no recognition, no title, no celebration. He simply chose loyalty over personal gain. If one day my daughter leads this company, I hope she understands that character matters more than ownership and dignity matters more than applause. Harold lowered the letter. Many people were openly emotional now. Some wiped away tears. Others stared at Ethan with astonishment and respect. The mystery was gone. In its place stood something far more powerful. Truth. Victoria's eyes filled. Every assumption she had made that morning came rushing back. The rusty truck. The quiet man she had judged in seconds. The dismissive thoughts she never imagined she would regret. Slowly, she walked across the ballroom. No cameras clicked. No one spoke. Even the music had stopped. She stopped in front of Ethan. For a moment, neither said a word. Then Victoria looked down before meeting his eyes again. I am sorry, she said. Her voice was honest. Human. I thought I understood this company. I thought I understood what success looked like. I was wrong. Ethan smiled gently. Not a triumphant smile. Not a vindicated smile. Just kindness. We all miss things sometimes. Victoria shook her head. Not like this. Ethan glanced toward Lily. Then back toward Victoria. Your father was a good man. He believed people were more important than buildings, titles, and stock prices. I think he would be proud of you for listening. Tears escaped before Victoria could stop them. Around them, the entire ballroom rose to its feet. One by one, row by row, executives, employees, investors, board members. No one had been asked to stand. They simply did. The applause began quietly, then grew stronger. Yet through it all, Ethan remained the same man who had arrived in a rusty truck that morning. Calm, humble, unchanged. Later that evening, as the guests departed, Victoria walked outside with Ethan and Lily. The old Ford sat beneath the lights of the parking lot. Victoria smiled at it differently now. Ethan opened the driver's door and helped Lily inside. Before leaving, he looked back at the towering headquarters. Then he looked at Victoria. Take care of it. She nodded. I will. Ethan smiled once more and climbed into the truck. The engine started with its familiar hum. Nothing about it looked impressive. Yet as it disappeared into the night, it carried something far more valuable than success. It carried character. And sometimes the strongest people are not the ones whose names appear on buildings. They are the ones who quietly helped build them and never asked for credit. If this story reminded you that dignity, kindness, and character still matter, share where you are watching from and tell us what moment stayed with you the most. And if stories like this speak to your heart, we would be honored to have you join us again for another journey worth remembering.